My name is Hannah Mitchell. I am 30 years old. On the night of my birthday, I booked the rooftop room at one of the finest restaurants in Midtown Manhattan. I invited my colleagues, my mentor, the senior partner of my firm, and my parents. I had just been promoted to Director of Litigation, the youngest woman ever to hold that title in the history of my firm. 6 years of 80-hour weeks. 6 years of taking the cases nobody else wanted. 6 years of building something real in a city that does not hand anything to anyone. I wanted one night, one room, one table where people raised a glass and said her name and meant it. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. My mother looked around the room and said, "This place is rather flashy, isn't it?" My father went straight to the bar. By the end of the evening, my mother had redirected my promotion toast to talk about my brother. My father had told a room full of my professional peers that what I did for a living did not matter, and my mother looked at me across the table and said honestly, "Hannah, sometimes I think your father and I would have been happier if we had stopped after one child." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my wine glass, took one slow sip, set it back down, and said something I had been building toward for 30 years without knowing it. Before I tell you what I said, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. Now let me tell you everything from the beginning. I grew up in a town called West Haven, about an hour outside Boston. 2-story colonial house. A maple tree my father never trimmed. A dog named Biscuit, who lived to be 17, and was the only creature in that house who ran to greet me when I came home. My brother Caleb is 3 years younger than me. He plays the cello. Has since he was 6. He went to one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the country on a partial scholarship and dropped out his junior year because, in my mother's words, the institution was not ready for his level of vision. He was 31 years old on the night of my birthday and still living in a loft in Brooklyn. A loft I paid for. I will come back to that. My parents built their entire identity around being the parents of a genius. My mother had a section of the kitchen wall near the breakfast nook that functioned as a shrine to Caleb. Newspaper clippings from when he was 12 and played at a summer music festival. A framed program from a recital. A photograph of him at 16 meeting a famous cellist backstage. These things were displayed with the reverence of artifacts. When relatives visited and asked about me, my mother would wave a hand and say, "Hannah doesn't really photograph well. She is more of a behind-the-scenes type." I was 11, the first time I heard her say it. I was standing at the top of the stairs holding a stuffed rabbit I had owned since I was 4 listening to her say it to my aunt. I felt something crack open in me that evening that I spent the next 2 decades trying to close with achievement. I made straight A's every year. I graduated valedictorian. I got into Columbia for undergrad on a full scholarship. I went to Yale Law on a merit award. Every milestone, every graduation, every letter I brought home, my mother would read it and smile and say, "That is wonderful, sweetheart," and then tell me something. Caleb was allegedly on the verge of accomplishing. He was never being considered for the residencies and fellowships, she described. She took small moments, an audition invitation, a passing conversation, and expanded them in the retelling until they became certainties. The truth was not the point. The point was that he was the one who mattered, and I was something the sun cast a shadow over. I learned to live in that shadow the way some people learn to live with a chronic injury. You compensate. You find other ways. You pour yourself into the one place where effort produces a measurable result, and you stay there because the alternative, which is feeling what is actually happening, is too expensive to afford while you still have things to accomplish. By the time I was 28, I was billing more hours than partners, twice my age. I was the attorney the senior litigators called when a deposition collapsed. I was the one who took over the firm's biggest pharmaceutical case after the lead attorney suffered a medical emergency and won it in a trial that lasted 11 weeks. I was good at my work with the specific completeness of someone who has poured everything that has nowhere else to go into a single vessel, and every month, without exception, I sent money home. My parents had refinanced the mortgage on the Colonial when I was in law school. They could no longer afford the payments, despite my father being a tenured professor of economics, which is the kind of irony that does not land as funny when you are the person filling the gap. I set up an automatic transfer on the 1st of every month. Then Caleb needed rent covered in Brooklyn. then health insurance, then studio time at a recording space in Brooklyn, where he had been working on the same album for 4 years, then groceries because my mother explained that an artist of his caliber should not have to navigate something as mundane as a supermarket. I paid for all of it, every month, from the day I received my first paycheck at 25 until the night of my birthday. I had given my family just over $400,000, not a loan, a gift, repeated monthly without request and without acknowledgement. Caleb sent me a text once that said, "Appreciate you, sis." That was the closest thing to gratitude I received from any of them in 5 years. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself this was what family was. That love sometimes looked like this. Like showing up financially when people needed you. Like being the reliable one. Like keeping the foundation solid so everyone else could build on it. I told myself that one day they would see me. Really see me. And it would all be worth it. I believed that completely until the night I stopped believing it. The birthday dinner was my idea. I booked the rooftop room at a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, an old establishment with brass railings and a view of the East River that made everyone who saw it catch their breath. The room rental alone cost nearly $3,000 before food or wine or gratuity. I did not hesitate. I had just been promoted to director of litigation, the youngest woman ever to hold that position at my firm. 6 years of work that most people would not have sustained had finally produced something definitive, and I wanted one evening where I stood at the front of a room and let people celebrate it. I invited 30 people, colleagues, 2 friends from law school, my mentor Judge Patricia Whitlock, who had supervised my first clerkship and had been the closest thing I had to a mother figure for the better part of a decade, the senior partner of my firm, Mr. Avery, a man of few words and significant weight, whose presence at a social occasion meant something, and my parents. Caleb could not come. He had a creative breakthrough in progress and did not want to interrupt his flow. I told myself I was relieved. I confirmed with my mother 3 times in the week before the dinner. 3 times she assured me they would be there in the brisk, slightly impatient tone she used when she found my questions tedious. "Of course we will be there, Hannah." I prepared for the evening the way I prepared for important trials. Carefully, thoroughly. I bought a navy silk dress I had been looking at for 2 months. I had my hair done. I stood in front of the mirror before leaving and thought that I looked, for once, like someone who deserved to be photographed. Judge Whitlock arrived early. She hugged me and said, "Hannah, I am so proud of you. You have no idea how proud I am." I almost lost my composure right there. I held it together. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. They walked in the way people walk into events they have done someone a favor by attending. My mother in cream cashmere and pearls. My father in his rumpled blazer. Neither of them brought anything. No flowers, no card, nothing. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek and looked around the room and said, "This place is rather flashy, isn't it?" My father grunted something I could not make out and moved toward the bar. I tried not to let it land. I had been trying not to let things land for 30 years. Dinner began. The wine was poured. Judge Whitlock stood to give the first toast, and what she said about me, about my work and my integrity, and the way I had carried myself through the pharmaceutical trial, I will hold those words inside me for the rest of my life. The room applauded. People raised their glasses. My mother sipped her wine and looked at her phone. Then Mr. Avery rose. He was not a man who spoke at social occasions without intention. The room understood this and went quiet immediately. He spoke for 3 minutes. He said I was the most strategically capable young litigator he had encountered in 40 years of practice. He said I was a credit to the profession. He said the partnership track had been adjusted to expedite my consideration, the kind of statement that, in our firm, meant something concrete and significant and not said lightly. The room went into the particular silence of people who have just heard something extraordinary. I looked at my parents. My father was looking at his phone. My mother was sitting up straighter, finally engaged, but she was not looking at me. She was looking at the room, taking inventory of the faces. And then, she raised her own glass, and in the warm performative voice she reserved for people she wanted to impress, she smiled around the table and said, "Well, isn't that lovely? Of course we have always been so blessed with our children. Caleb, our youngest, is finishing what I truly believe will be the defining album of his generation. Yo-Yo Ma himself has expressed personal interest. That is the kind of legacy that endures, isn't it?" Money is one thing, but art is forever. I want to describe the silence that followed, but I am not sure I have the right words for it. It was the silence of 30 professionals, several of them litigators trained to read a room, all simultaneously understanding that a mother had just redirected her daughter's career moment to speak about a son who was not present. I saw Judge Whitlock's mouth fall open. I saw Mr. Avery set his glass down very slowly. And I saw, finally and completely, and without any remaining ambiguity, what my parents were and had always been, and what no amount of money or effort or achievement was ever going to change. My father looked up from his phone. He sensed the temperature in the room and decided to contribute. He cleared his throat, and in the slow professorial voice he used, for undergraduates he found beneath him, he said, "Hannah is a good worker. She has always been our reliable one. But let us be honest. Pushing paper for corporations is not exactly the same as creating something meaningful, is it? We have always said it. Caleb is the one who matters." He said this at full volume, in a room full of my colleagues, on the night of my promotion. 30 minutes after the senior partner of my firm had announced I was being accelerated toward partnership. I do not see how long the silence lasted after that. Long enough for everyone at that table to understand precisely what kind of family I had come from. Long enough for me to feel the full weight of 30 years arriving, all at once in a single moment. I stood up. I heard my chair scrape back. I heard the room hold its breath. I looked at my mother and I said, "Do you know how much money I have given this family in the last 5 years?" Her face went tight. "Hannah, this is not the place." $412,000, I said. I said the number into the quiet of that room and watched it land the way a stone lands in still water. "That is your mortgage. That is my brother's rent. That is his health insurance. That is his studio time. That is his groceries. I have been paying for his groceries for 4 years, while I worked 80-hour weeks. While I did not take a vacation. While I sat alone in my apartment on Christmas because nobody invited me home." My mother started to speak. I did not let her. "Do you know what Caleb has produced in those 4 years?" I said. "Not one finished recording. Not one public performance. Not one paid engagement. He is 31 years old, and he is living in a loft I pay for, eating food I pay for, while you tell strangers he is the next great musical voice of his generation." My father stood up. His face had gone dark. "You are out of line," he said. "No," I said, "I am 30 years old. I am the youngest director of litigation in the history of this firm. I am not out of line. I am the woman who has kept your house from going into foreclosure for half a decade, and you just told a room full of my professional peers that what I do does not matter." My mother stood then too, and she said the sentence I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She looked at me with her smile, still half fixed on her face, and she said honestly, "Hannah, sometimes I think your father and I would have been happier if we had stopped after one child. Things were so much more peaceful before you came along." I heard someone gasp. I believe it was Judge Whitlock. I looked at my mother, the woman who had carried me for 9 months, and had apparently been quietly building a case against me ever since. I looked at my father standing beside her, nodding, as though she had said something reasonable, and something inside me that had been holding on for 30 years released itself completely and finally, and without drama. Not like a snapping, like an exhale, long and slow and finished. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I picked up my wineglass, and I took one slow sip, and I set it back down, and I looked at my mother with a clarity I had never felt before in my life, and I said, "You know what, Mom. Wish granted. From this moment forward, you have one child. I am no longer your daughter. Live the rest of your lives as though I was never born. I will return the favor." I picked up my purse. I walked the length of that table past every face in that room. Judge Whitlock reached out and took my hand as I passed. I squeezed it once. I did not look back at my parents. I walked down 4 flights of stairs because I could not bear to stand still in an elevator. I stepped out onto Lexington Avenue into cold October rain, the thin, relentless kind that gets into everything. I walked 12 blocks home without an umbrella. I did not cry once. I got home. I took off the navy dress. I put on sweatpants. I sat on my couch in the dark for a few minutes. Then I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was log into my bank. 3 recurring transfers, all set to autopay on the 1st of every month. The mortgage, the rent, the health insurance. I canceled all 3. The screen asked me, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes without hesitating. Then I logged into the health insurance portal and removed Caleb from the policy. Then I sent a formal email to the property management company, stating Caleb from the policy. Then I sent a formal email to the property management company, stating I was terminating my role as guarantor immediately. Then I canceled the monthly studio booking in Brooklyn, which was also in my name. It took 45 minutes. In 45 minutes, I unwound $400,000 worth of obligation. There was no surge of anger, no dramatic satisfaction, just a clean and surgical quiet. Like a room after a long noise has finally stopped and you realize you had stopped hearing it long ago because you had grown so used to it. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I slept 12 hours straight, the most complete sleep I had experienced in years. I woke to 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. I read none of them. I made coffee. I sat by my window and watched the city below. I thought about Biscuit, my childhood dog, who had died when I was 16. He was the only member of that household who had ever been genuinely happy to see me. It had taken me 14 years to understand that what my parents had been calling love was actually a form of accounting. They gave when it served them. They withheld when it did not. I had spent 3 decades trying to earn something that was not on offer, and had mistaken the effort for virtue. The next 2 weeks were quiet in the way that spaces become quiet after something large has been removed from them. Mr. Avery did not mention the dinner. He walked into my office on the Monday morning following and placed a folder on my desk. The Henderson case, he said. Lead chair. It was the largest case the firm had taken on that year. Over $200 million in exposure. He left without further comment. I understood what he was communicating. He had seen what he had seen at that table, and this was his way of saying, I know who you are, and that woman is not. Judge Whitlock called on Wednesday. She did not ask if I was okay, because she knew me well enough to know that asking would not be what I needed. She said, Hannah, my husband, and I want you to come for Thanksgiving. We are having my niece and her family. There will be a lot of people and a lot of food, and you will not be required to be impressive. You will be required to bring a pie. Are we clear? I started crying for the first time since the birthday dinner. I said, yes, ma'am. Apple or pumpkin? She said both, obviously. 6 weeks after the dinner, my parents appeared at my building. I do not know exactly how they got my address. I suspect Caleb gave it to them when pressured. He had never been resilient under pressure. It had never needed to be developed in him, because there had always been someone to absorb the consequences on his behalf. The doorman called up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I told him to send them up. I wanted to look at them one more time on my own ground. I wanted to see it clearly and completely, and know with my whole body that I had made the right decision. They walked into my apartment and looked smaller than I remembered. My mother had on the same cream cashmere. My father had not shaved. They did not apologize. They did not ask if they could sit. They simply stood in my living room, and my mother said, Hannah, this has gone on long enough. We need to discuss Caleb. I said nothing. He has been evicted, my father said. The property company confirmed you withdrew as guarantor. He has nowhere to go. He could move home, I said. My mother shook her head. Hannah, you know that is not appropriate. He needs to be in the city for his work. His work, I said. And the health insurance, my mother continued. He has been having anxiety. He needs his therapist. The new insurance estimates are completely unreasonable. He is 31. I said, Hannah, please. My mother took a step toward me. We are family. Family takes care of each other. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. It was not anger. It was not satisfaction. It was something quieter than either of those things. A clarity so complete it felt almost physical. Like standing on a beach after a storm that has been going on so long, you forgot what stillness felt like. I said, Mom and Dad, I want you to listen carefully, because I am going to say this once. They were quiet. You told me in front of 30 of my professional colleagues that you wished you had stopped having children after my brother. You told me my work does not matter. You said, in front of my mentor, that I am less significant than my brother, who has not completed a single professional project in 4 years. And then you came to my apartment 6 weeks later, with no acknowledgement of any of that, to ask me to continue paying his rent. My father began to speak. I raised my hand and he stopped. You are not villains, I said. You are not dramatic people in a dramatic story. You are something simpler and harder than that. You are two people who looked at your daughter for 30 years and saw a financial resource. And the only reason you are standing in my apartment right now is that the resource stopped. That is the entire reason. There is no other reason. My mother's eyes had filled. I want you to leave, I said. I want you to leave my apartment, and I want you to leave my life. If Caleb cannot cover his rent, he can move home. If he cannot afford his therapist, he can find one on a sliding scale the way most adults do. If the mortgage is too much, you can sell the house. You have equity. You have a professor's salary. You have options available to you that you have simply never received to use. Because I was always there absorbing the problem before you had to face it. I am no longer there. My mother was crying. I believe it was genuine. I think for the first time in my life I had said something she could not redirect or minimize or turn into a story about someone else's talent. I think for one moment, she understood what she had done across 30 years. I felt sorry for her. I want to be honest about that. Some part of me wanted to soften, to pull her close and tell her it was all right. That instinct had lived inside me for so long it had become indistinguishable from who I was. But that instinct was the trap. Pity had been their mechanism, and I had spent 30 years caught inside it. I walked to the door and opened it. My father said on his way out that I would regret this. I said maybe, but it will be my regret. Not yours. The door closed. I stood alone in my apartment in the late afternoon light and felt for the first time in my life that the room I was standing in completely and entirely belonged to me. Not because I owned it. Because there was no one left in it who was taking something from me. The Henderson case took 8 months. We won. The settlement made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I made partner 3 months after that. The youngest in the history of the firm. A journalist from a professional publication asked to interview me about my path. I almost declined. I had never been comfortable with visibility. But I thought about every woman who had spent years being the invisible one, the reliable one, the one whose accomplishments became footnotes to someone else's narrative. And I said yes. I told the truth in that interview. Not all of it. I did not name my family, but I told the shape of it. I talked about being the financially responsible child in a family that treated responsibility as obligation rather than love. I talked about the difference between being useful and being valued. I talked about the moment you understand that endurance and strength are not the same thing, and that the decision to stop enduring something that is destroying you is not weakness. It is the most precise form of intelligence available to you. The piece traveled far and quietly. Women wrote to me for months, from every kind of life. A nurse in her 40s who said she had called her therapist after reading it and started the process of separating from a mother who had treated her the same way. A teacher who said she had finally closed the accounts she had been funding for a sibling who had never once thanked her. A woman who said simply that she had not known it was allowed to stop. I keep that last one close. The permission question, whether it is allowed, because that is the real wound in families like mine. They do not just take your money, or your time, or your energy. They take your sense of what you are permitted. They make you feel that their need, supersedes your right to exist for yourself. They teach you that love is a performance of sacrifice, and that stopping the sacrifice is the same as stopping the love. It is not the same. That is the thing nobody tells you. Stopping the sacrifice is not the same as stopping the love. You can love people and refuse to be used by them. You can wish people well from a distance that protects you. You can grieve what was never given to you by parents who did not know how to give it, and also choose not to spend another decade waiting for them to learn. I do not know what happened to the house in West Haven. I do not know where Caleb is now. I heard through a cousin about a year after the dinner that he had moved back home and found work at a music store. I hope genuinely that he is building something real. I hope the removal of the financial cushion I had provided for years eventually became something useful for him. I hope he found that standing on his own feet was not as impossible as my parents had led him to believe. But I do not reach out. I do not check. The messages they still send a few times a year, on my birthday, on holidays, some version of the same appeal dressed in different language. I do not read them. I built a life, a real one, small in some ways, enormous in others. I have a partner named Theo who is kind in the daily ways that matter, who remembers things I mentioned weeks ago, who sat across from Judge Whitlock at dinner and survived being thoroughly evaluated by her, which is not a small thing. I have a dog, a rescue, small and impractical and deeply committed to sitting on my feet while I work. I named her Biscuit. After the only family member from my childhood who ever ran to the door when I came home. I have people who, when I walk into a room, are genuinely glad I am there, who raise their glasses when I am being celebrated, who do not use the moment to redirect attention to themselves. I built that slowly and on purpose from the raw material of the friendships and mentorships and professional relationships I had been cultivating for years, while I was also, in the background, funding a family that was looking through me. That is the thing about being invisible in the place you most needed to be seen. You learn to find other places. You learn to build other rooms. And eventually, if you are lucky and persistent and honest enough with yourself about what you are actually doing and why, those rooms become the real ones. The ones you choose are always the real ones. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, the daughter whose name comes after a pause, the one whose achievements are the setup for someone else's punchline, the one who has been sending money home with one hand while being told she is not enough with the other, I want to say one thing directly to you. You are allowed to stop, not because they are bad people necessarily, not because the love was never real in any form, but because your life belongs to you. Your labor belongs to you. Your Saturday mornings, and your Thursday evenings, and your birthday dinners, and your professional milestones all belong to you. And the people who have spent years treating those things as resources to be drawn from, rather than moments to be honored, have told you everything you need to know about whether more time and more money will change anything. It will not change anything. I know because I gave it every reasonable opportunity to. What changes things is the decision. Quiet and final and made in your own kitchen late at night in sweatpants with a laptop open and 3 transfers waiting to be canceled. The screen will ask you, are you sure? Say yes, Salib 12 hours. Wake up and make coffee and watch the city from your window and understand for the first time what it feels like when the room you are sitting in completely belongs to you. It feels like nothing dramatic. It feels like breathing normally after a very long time of not quite getting enough air. That is what freedom feels like. I had just never known the difference before. If this story reached something in you, leave a heart in the comments below and tell me, have you ever had to choose yourself over the family that raised you? I read every single one. Subscribe so you never miss the next story.